Welcome, everybody. This is D. Durrell with D. Durrell Life Solutions. D. Durrell the Rebirth, and I'm also broadcasting from the Sectors TV. Today, I will do a full-fledged, comprehensive presentation on major depressive disorder. I have not done a live stream on presenting mental illness in a very long time. Before I get started, I want to give a shout out to Ms. T. Cree, and also want to give a shout out to the real one. Now, I'm going to give somewhat of a preamble to what has inspired me to discuss this particular topic in regards to major depressive disorder. What I'm going to do is give a detailed analysis based on statistical data, DSM criteria, things that are discussed within the framework of professional counseling. And I'm also going to discuss things as it relates to my own clinical experience being a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas. Now, I do understand that this particular topic, whenever I do discuss mental illness in detail and discuss mental illness from a professional standpoint, it may not always garner the largest following. I may not have 50, 60, 70 people coming in like I normally would when I'm doing negative or other entertaining like sector types of content. And that's okay. That is the reason why I took it upon myself. I specifically took it upon myself to separate my channels, to separate the content. This is typically the type of content that I would present on D. Durrell Life Solutions. Every now and then I will discuss this as it relates to something that is going on in a particular sector. One of the reasons that I decided to educate this sector or sectors on major depressive disorder is because there was a content creator who took it upon herself to disclose that she had this illness. There have been many other instances in which other content creators have discussed that they had PTSD. There have been countless other instances in which I have presented detailed information about certain types of mental illness when the situation warranted it. Before I continue, I also like to say hey to Miss Queen Mercy. Also give a shout out to Miss Honeybee and also Miss Sherwood. Appreciate you all for coming in. Now, what you all are about to see before I begin to show these slides, I'm going to give detailed analysis as it relates to depression, clinical term, major depressive disorder. Now, it is basically a summary that's going to take about 45 minutes to about an hour or so, depending on how I'm able to explain and give detailed information on how it presents itself, how it affects. And then also for those that want to ask questions at the end, you will be allowed to do a Q&A. In the Q&A, you all can ask questions as it relates to major depression, and I can answer those questions to the best of my ability. And then we'll go from there. I really enjoy doing this type of content. The reason why I enjoy doing it is because it specifically relates to the core of what I do day-to-day professionally. A large percentage of my population is depressed that I counsel as far as that are in my mental health programs and that are also in private practice. I deal with issues of depression day to day. I deal with issues of anxiety, psychosis, stress-related issues day to day. People with intellectual deficits day to day. And so within this, it allows me the ability to pretty much speak freely, speak confidently in what I treat day to day within the confines of my practice. A lot of that I will talk about will be based on information that has been compiled by various um, mental health agencies, mental health organizations, by professional organizations such as the American Counseling Association and also the Texas Counseling Association, also NAMI, the National Mental Health Association, and also the Substance Abuse Mental Health Association, as it relates to the prevalence of major depressive disorder in the United States. And I will specifically speak on things that are germane to the Black community and the facts that there's a large percentage of our population who is diagnosed with major depressive disorder. Now, as follows, I'm going to go ahead and get into this. And so I like to say for those who are listening and those coming in, I would encourage that regardless of the things that I say, if you want to put comments in the comment section, but if you're wanting to ask me questions specifically about certain things, I would encourage you to reserve that towards the end of the presentation so that I can clearly and precisely um, answer each question in chronological order so I don't miss anybody. Okay. Now, I do want you all to give comments on what I'm stating if you choose to, or as you're interacting with one another. But I would like to ask everybody to reserve questions related to this issue towards the end. Okay. All right. So I'm going to get started. Okay. So as you see here, we're going to discuss major depressive disorder. We're going to speak about it in detail. We're going to talk about how it affects our community. Okay? Now, what we must understand is that major depressive disorder affects a large percentage of African American people, and it also affects well over 10% of the American population. Matter of fact, there's over 3 million people who are diagnosed or major depressive cases a year. Okay? So I just wanted to kind of give that brief introduction into that. Also, I'm going to talk about in this particular situation the things that we're going to discuss in the order in which they will be discussed in this particular presentation. First, I'm going to give an overview of the mental disease. Number two, I'm going to talk about statistics. I'm going to talk about DSM-5 criteria. I'm going to talk about how it presents and the causes that allow it. I'm going to focus on the treatment and also prognosis. I want to also, before I start, give a shout out to Faith Factor. She said this is a good topic. A lot of our people struggle with depression, but go undiagnosed and treated. And I will get to that. Give a shout out to Fly Boys. No, I'm not a doctor, but I am a licensed professional counselor. I am licensed through the state of Texas, and I have over 20 years experience working in mental health, and I have 16 years experience working as a licensed clinician. So we're going to talk about the disease itself, the statistics, the DSM criteria, how it presents, treatment, prognosis, and then we're going to undergo a Q&A, question and answer. The overview. So in my research and just also within my experience of mental illness as it relates to depression, depression is characterized as an inability to cope. This is very elementary in your study of depression. Anybody that is depressed The depression like behaviors are a response to issues that they cannot cope with, they can't handle, it's overwhelming, it's devastating, and this is the psychological response. Okay? It causes an inability to function in daily life activities, meaning you are not necessarily focused, you're not necessarily functioning within a normal range of what you typically will function in if the depression or the situation that led to the depression did not present itself or ever existed. In that response, there is a change in mood. People are not typically depressed. People typically function in a manner that is relative to the environment that they're in. And most people do not suffer extreme sadness throughout most of the day, every day. And when I get to the criteria, it will paint an illustration clearly defined on what it means to be clinically depressed. People will see a decrease in their regular functioning, not being themselves. It is very observable for one to see a person functioning in a manner that is not themselves. Okay? You will notice, and I will talk about the telltale signs of you noticing that a person is not functioning in their environment as it relates to their home environment, their school environment, their work environment, their social environment. In many instances, if a person is clinically depressed, they will fail to function in the four areas that I've spoken about. That you will see issues in the way they function at home. If they're in school, they will have issues within the educational setting that they function in. They will have issues, they will have lower productivity of functioning in work. And also as they relate to their social environment with friends and other recreational activities that they partake in with other people. There will be signs of a lack of interaction, a lack of positiveness, um, hesitancy, lack of energy, just a lack of interactive um, behavior. I also want to talk about the fact of suicidal behavior, which is highly visible. Now, when I talk about suicidal behavior, I am not speaking specifically of a person being successful in ending their life. I'm also talking about all of the suicidal themes and the thoughts of death and dying, thoughts of ending it all, giving away personal items and valuable items that one would not typically engage in, listening to certain types of music, softness of one's voice, gloomy like behavior, flat affect, slow speech. You may see superficial self mutilating behaviors, such as cutting oneself, attempting to take pills to kill oneself, threatening to hurt oneself, repetitive thoughts about killing oneself, or in a stressful situation, they may verbalize that they want to kill themselves or that they wish they were no longer here. And in some instances, particularly when one is using a journal to journal write, or they use art, in which if they are unable to verbalize these feelings, they will use art as a way of expressing those thoughts. Visibly, you also can witness loss or gain in weight. People who are depressed find themselves in many instances not eating in a manner that they typically would eat. And with that being said, one would notice that someone is going 2 or 3 days without eating, or they have to force themselves to eat, or it takes a great deal of effort to partake in eating foods and eating on a schedule or eating in a manner that is naturally routine for them on a day to day basis. Or the opposite of that, someone may engage in what we call emotional eating when they are depressed. They may overeat, they may eat a lot of things that they typically wouldn't eat, or they would eat in amounts that are somewhat highly skewed in the positive as opposed to what they would typically eat on a day-to-day basis. So if a person eats sweets 2 or 3 times a week, but when an activating event occurred that caused them to be depressed, they may typically want to eat chocolates and ice creams and chips and other different things every day or multiple times in one day. When a person has experienced a negative activating event, they may respond in eating, binge eating per se. They may focus on also drinking, which is also a depressant. But what you're going to notice is there's a change in the loss or gain in weight due to drinking, whether it's alcohol and other sweets and other different drinks, or eating things. So the bodily intake of fluids and foods have a tendency to either sway in the negative or in the positive, in which you will visually see weight loss or weight gain. However, the person who is engaging in this behavior is unable to perceive themselves in a way in which others see them because of their current state of mind. Also, I want to caution to each and every one of you, and this to me is one of the biggest telltale signs of depression, is the fact that one can inadvertently isolate themselves without knowing it. And when I talk about isolating oneself, I'm speaking of not leaving the house, not leaving your room, choose not to speak to people, not answering phone calls, not responding to text messages or emails, not on social media, not in their regular social groups, doing activities that are representative of what they may engage in from day to day. And usually, in many cases, people who suffer from major depressive disorder are not necessarily the most functional people in the world as it relates to interacting with others. Also, I also want to add in here is the issue of being kept per se. You may also focus that people may not keep up their hygiene. I use that when I talked about possible unkept physical appearance. That kind of can go along with that as it relates to lack of um, putting on deodorant, washing your face, taking a bath or bathing daily, wearing the same clothes or wearing clean clothes, not just caring of one's personal appearance, keeping up one's hair, brushing one's teeth, not doing things that are typical of what they would do in any other situation or any other period in their life. Okay? So again, you can review those things. For those that want to watch the replay, There's also other things, but it's kind of representative of what major depression usually looks like clinically. And I want you all to understand that as I go into the criteria, there's about 8 different features related to major depression. One must have at least 5 of those symptoms in a 2-week standpoint to a month standpoint. So just because somebody may present one symptom doesn't mean that they're depressed. It is a combination of 5 or more symptoms working parallel to one another over a 2-week period. Next thing, we're going to go about the statistical analysis. We're going to speak on the statistical analysis as it relates to major depressive disorder. I'm going to speak on this, and I'm also going to speak on things that I know specifically as it relates to my own private practice and clients that I see in various government agencies. So it will not just be relative to or confined to what you are seeing on the screen as it relates to major depression overall. Number one, major depression affects an estimated over 17 million people in the United States currently, according to 2021 statistics. Over 3 million people are diagnosed with major depression a year. 8.9% of African Americans are diagnosed with depression. Now, I want to pause on that. Almost 9% of the 17 million people that have major depression in this country, 8% are African American, although we only represent 13 to 14% of the population. And I want to keep in mind that is a conservative number, because there's probably anywhere between 3 to 500 to maybe another million or so that are undiagnosed based on the fact of how African Americans view mental health services, period. Okay? And this goes for Black women, Black men, children. And I'm going to talk about what causes African Americans to be so depressed. And I'm going to say this. To me, the biggest factor that contributes to African Americans experiencing mental health illness, period, is institutional and systemic racism. And remnants of institutional racism, as it spills into various aspects of American life, affects the ability of how African Americans respond to certain things or are being targeted or treated in certain ways that is not necessarily relative to the majority culture. It's not the same. We're not treated and perceived, and we don't socialize with everybody the same way people socialize absence of our presence in certain situations. And that goes within the educational system, the healthcare system, the criminal justice system, and in all aspects of any economical situation or field of work. African Americans undergo a lot of stress that can contribute to depression, mistreatment, racism, and also the anxiety of how they're being perceived and going about doing things in a manner to try to please others to accept them. That takes effort, and it takes mental fortitude, and it strains us psychologically in that process. The fact that we operate in a situation based on our historical references and context and where we are as a people, how we're being perceived, and how we're stereotyped, that people treat us in a manner that is somewhat more conflictual than any other group of people. And the fact of the matter is that when this is being exposed and when this is being confronted, the people who contribute in this manner gaslight or have a tendency to act oblivious to the fact that they treat us in this manner. There's a great deal of African Americans who obtain or they develop being depressed due to the mistreatment in their fields of work or any employment situation that they are involved in. I deal with a lot of work related situations in which people are stressed and uneasy about how they're treated in their place of employment. I also want to talk about the fact that there's a high level as it relates to other, that 10% of the black youth have major depression. That is very high as it relates to the Asian community. The white community is not that much lower. And also outside of the Hispanic community, which to me, they have a tendency to have the highest diagnoses of depression than any other group. But I think that that is alarmingly high, that our kids, particularly as I talked about the four major environments, particularly in their family and in school, there are major contributors that causes depression among this population. And I'm talking about from ages 5 to 17 years of age. There are many kids who are depressed due to psychosocial issues in the home as it relates to abuse, financial issues, lack of food, clothing, shelter, lights, heat, violence, criminal behavior, environmental issues as it relates to the area in which they live in, that culture itself, and also being perceived in negative ways amongst others outside of your community, particularly in schools, are being stereotyped. Now, I did also talk about the fact that there's a high percentage of Black people who are um, diagnosed with major depressive disorder, despite being 14% of the population. It's very high when you basically look at our total presence in population. It should be lower. Next thing, the percentage could be higher due to lack of mental health accessibility. And what I'm meaning by mental accessibility is meaning mental health services, accessibility to mental health services. There's a lack of effective mental health treatment. There's also cultural inferences that hinder our ability to want to seek the services in the first place, particularly as it relates to Black men that don't like to see anything medical per se of any ilk. I'm saying they don't want to, Black men don't want to see doctors. Black men don't want to go to church. Black men don't want to see therapists. Black men don't want to see anybody or refuse to see or seek services that can help them anything that is germane to them improving their overall health. And that has a lot to do with it because Black women, although in our community we do have anxiety towards mental health services because we don't want to be perceived as being mentally ill or being crazy. Also, the fact that we have a historical record in which when Black people sought certain services, in many situations we were misdiagnosed, undertreated, mistreated socially, lack of respect, and we were not helped. We actually became worse. So I am, because I am African American, I am empathetic and I'm also sympathetic to the fact that these experiences contributed to our hesitancy of seeking mental health services. Although we have to, and it is important, it is critical for us if we're going to improve as a people, we have to evolve into a group of people who are going to seek services and tools that can improve our overall function and not hang on to irrational thoughts and beliefs and ideologies that keep us in the same position that we've been in for a long period of time. We have an issue of thinking that the church can provide those mental health services. Someone mentioned about listening to me as a trained licensed professional, as opposed to listening to those who claim in the church and so forth. There are so many situations in my private practice and in my mental health experience. I would say somewhere between 30 or 40% of most African Americans who privately seek my services thought that they could receive mental health services within that church. They thought that they, for some reason, thought that their pastor can provide the professional services to help them through whatever situations that they were going through. Now, I am not going to discourage anyone from seeking emotional, spiritual, and biblical support from the church. I think that that interaction with people, we promote that in therapy. We promote the communication with family, friends, church family, pastor to spiritually support you in prayer. Although we don't, and it's unethical for us to showcase or influence our own religious beliefs, I encourage any type of positive interaction that can help one function, particularly with getting that support from other human beings. I typically encourage those to continue their participation in those endeavors. It can only help. But when you are seeking certain people who are untrained, uneducated, unskilled, don't have the knowledge of work, don't have the practical experience to do things that they are just not trained in doing, that is a problem. So in many instances, when this phenomenon occurs, which it has occurred many times, I found myself correcting the mistakes of untrained so-called counselors. And in most cases, it wasn't very difficult. It was just me clinically and professionally just doing what I do, and things, went for the better. So it was never extreme situations where I felt I had to exercise high level interventions and so on, or applications of certain things to alleviate the distress that one experienced through their pastor or the church. Although there are instances where there were trauma related in relationship, things that were really difficult. For the most part, I just basically stayed within theory, stayed within my theoretical framework, and the consumer themselves found improvement and were glad that they were able to identify a black therapist to help them in the process. I would say at least 75% of all black clients that I provide services for had difficulty finding a black therapist, and many wanted a black male as their therapist for the most part. And there are not a lot of black male therapists in Houston, and there's typically not a lot of black male therapists in the United States, period. Next thing, there are possibly hundreds and thousands not diagnosed. I kind of spoken of that earlier, that the the 8.9 million people percent of African Americans who are diagnosed, it's probably a higher number based on those who have accessibility to services to be diagnosed in the first place. And then you have a large percentage that simply refuse to seek the services because they don't believe in receiving therapy and they don't believe in seeing a doctor, period. And that is, and of all groups of people, African Americans are the least likely to want to seek therapy. Um, I see a high level of hesitancy, particularly among Asian Americans, Indian Americans, and also Hispanic Americans also have some hesitancy. And if they do seek the services, they do, particularly Asian Americans and Indians, they will seek the services of someone that looks like them, which nothing is wrong with that. The problem is that not a lot of Asian therapists, there are definitely not a lot of Indian or Asian therapists, period, and so on. And I also spoke on the low percentage of African American participating in therapy or medication management. Again, that goes in line. There's a low percentage of African Americans that participate in these activities because they don't believe in mental health services, period. They don't believe that they're crazy. They shouldn't believe they're crazy, but they're using the wrong word. What they should be focusing on is that they're not functioning at a level that is similar or within a normal range of what they similarly would operate day to day, routinely operate in. I'm more focused on your level of functionality as opposed to what type of mental health diagnosis you have. Unfortunately, I think that as a mental health community, we have to do a better job of psychoeducation to those who are on the edge about seeing a therapist or any other type of mental health professional. And we have to get away from these myths and fallacies about mental health. We have to sway away from making people feel inadequate in that process. And that's very difficult and tricky because as clinicians, we also want to maintain our professionalism and we want to structure things in a way, in a manner that we know from research works, the way we were trained. So I think in some instances, that could be a sense of transference and countertransference that affects the ability of a client to feel comfortable to attend therapy. And there are therapies that, such as person centered therapy and so on, in which you want to be as personable as you can and open and allow a person to express themselves in a non directive manner. So and also you can use icebreakers and all different types of things within orientation to help within that orientational services to help a person feel comfortable and feel like you know where they're coming from. You can feel what they're feeling. You can hear what they're hearing. You can become more. You can experience more oneness with that person. In the African American community, that is highly important because if a Black person does not feel that you are understanding them or you're with them in conjunction to that interaction of trying to help them, they will not come back. That's facts. They will not come back. There are situations in which me as a clinician, I did not connect or I failed to connect, particularly with lower economical families that will view me in transference as being an uppity, bougie Negro because of the way I present myself. And they don't think that I understand where they're coming from when I basically do. I'm able to get them to understand within 2 or 3 sessions. There were many times when I would speak to particularly Black families. They saw me as one way from the initial interaction, and then within 3 to 4 sessions, they saw me in another light based on that interaction and the rapport that was being built. Also, I found that within the LGBT community, also, in which one of the first things a person in the LGBT community may ask you is, are you gay or are you open or do you support gay or LGBT like issues? And my response is that I'm indifferent. I do not support it, nor will I ever support. However, I am not here to support you in being LGBT. I'm here to support you in whatever issues that you have that may be within the confines of the LGBT community. I am indifferent to whether you choose to live this lifestyle or not. I'm not going to be here to openly judge you or say any type of disparaging comments or say anything within my own personal viewpoint, because as a therapist, that is not ethically responsible to do so. My job is to provide the service based on the goals and the issues that you have, whether you are LGBT or not. But you have to understand, guys, that when people come, they don't understand that. So it's your job as a therapist to communicate that to them. And so there are many situations in which people ask me that, and I told them I didn't care whether they were LGBT or not. And this is the person you're dating, or this is the situation. I'm going to treat you accordingly. And that's exactly what I did. Because we have to understand the dynamics of a relationship, whether it is same sex or different sex or whatever, heterosexual, the dynamics are the same in most cases. There are some things that are going to be different because of the same sex, but for the most part, the interactiveness between two parties is going to be the same. They deal with the same issues, just in a different context. Now let's focus on DSM criteria. This is the part that I wanted to focus on. My the hallmark of mental illness, of mental health, is the evaluation, diagnosis, treatment, characterization of major depressive disorder. I want you all to understand as it relates to the criteria and features, and I've stated this earlier, a person that has this disorder, not just 1 or 2 traits, must have at least 5 or more symptoms during a 2-week period, and one symptom should be depressed or a loss of interest of pleasure activity. So what I'm stating is that if a person is going to have 5 of the 8, one of them has to be at least being depressed mood, or they must have a loss of interest or in pleasurable activities or things that they're interested in. They have to have at least one of those two things. You can't have 6 of the other and not one of these, or both. So I just want to make that be clear. The two most important features is having having a depressed mood or a lack of pleasurable activities or lack of interest in pleasurable activities. Because basically when people are depressed, they're less productive, they're less interactive. Let's focus on the features. And I'm going to read the features as follow, and then I'm going to talk in summary about the features. Okay? So, we want to focus on depressed mood most of the day, meaning 12 or more hours a day or throughout the day. Sometime it may happen at certain times of the day. You're depressed, you're sad. Number 2, lack of interest in pleasurable activities daily. Again, I use those two first because those are the two most important ones, and you have to have at least one of those in order to be depressed. Number 4, lack of eating or overeating may cause significant weight loss. Okay? Now, to me, I think a better way of describing it is a disruption. There's a disruption in your eating habits. And I know I use lack of eating, which is usually most of the time, but then there's also those that overeat. I also want to coin that there's also a sleep also can be disrupted. People can also oversleep or not, or because of their restlessness, which is kind of it goes in line with um, lethargic behavior and so forth, which is the next one. Um, it goes kind of in line with that. So, because there's disruptions in eating and sleeping, and in many instances, as I assess, particularly when I'm using the Beck Depressive Scales assessment, it talks about those things when you're doing, small assessments to assess to evaluate how depressed someone is, and you can utilize the that particular scale um, before any session. Okay. So we're going to just kind of review that, and I'm going to kind of go into different types of different, as far as it relates to all types of assessments. And let me get back to the features. Okay. Lethargic movement, slow down of thoughts, slow down body movement. So what we're talking about is just the lack of continuity and motion of thoughts, feelings, behaviors, body position, movements, collectively operating simultaneously. There's a disruption in that. There's a slowness of it. You're not moving around like you once. You're not speaking in manner and pitches that you once spoke in. Your verbal reflections are off. Your facial expressions are flat. Slow speech. You're very lethargic overall. Your concentration has also been slowed in conjunction to that. People notice this, other people notice this about their loved ones and friends when they're talking to them or interacting with them face to face. You're noticing that something is not right. And usually what people may ask is that, hey, is something wrong? Is something bothering you? And in many cases, people don't, the person who's depressed doesn't want to answer that question. They don't want to answer that question. They don't want to answer that because they don't really want you to know that. And those are facts. I talked about loss of energy. That kind of works hand in hand. Feelings of worthlessness. Now, I want to hit on that because, see, when we talk about feelings of worthlessness, we're now stepping into the bounds of suicidality. We're now speaking of situations in which people are looking at life as very bleak, as blue, the sense of helplessness, hopelessness. At the bottom, the last thing to talk about recurring thoughts, death. It kind of goes hand in hand. You start to devalue oneself. This can be inflicted by um, things that you are going through and how you're being treated by others, or you're not in a position or in a relationship or situation that you think you're supposed to be in. So the things of feelings of worthlessness can be easily identified in how a person verbally express themselves and how they repetitively say negative things or a lack of positive things. And its association with typical things that go on within their life, things that happen in everyday life. Oh, this happened. I don't really want to go there. I hate that I hate driving on the highway, or I don't want to go to this place because it looks or it smells like this. I don't want to go to so and so's house because they're mean. Everything is negative. But also, your worthlessness as far as, oh, I can't do this because I'm dumb, I'm stupid. Oh, I'm just not smart enough. I'm not good enough. Why would he want me? Why would she want me? Nobody loves me. I should just end it all. Nobody cares. Those particular phrases are associated with signs of worthlessness, which also is heavily connected to suicidal like behavior. Now, talked about poor concentration. Poor concentration can exist in all aspects of life, particularly when it comes to education and your field of work, because it dilutes your ability to be productive. You're less productive, or you're not productive at all. And you have a difficulty in putting forth the effort just to be average. It's a strain, it's stressful, it's exhausting, particularly in clients that I have that are referred to me through EAP services. In many instances, they verbalize the fact that when they're, soon as they leave out of their car and they can visualize themselves being at work, that in itself causes stress and is exhausting. And as soon as they walk into the door, they're tired or they don't want to be there. And it's difficult to do minor activities, day-to-day tasks that typically usually would not involve a heavy investment in energy. It takes a lot for them to do small tasks of little importance. We're not even talking about the things of great importance, but just things of little importance. And lastly, we want to talk about recurrent thoughts of death recurrent thoughts of not being there, feeling like you're not worth. And see, what we have to understand is, as we speak, that this is the reason why 5 of the 8 symptoms, because they kind of are interconnected. Because having recurrent thoughts can go in line with feeling worthless. It can go in line with a depressed mood or just lack of interest. These things are all interconnected in some aspects. I've talked about the fact that the expression of this can not only be verbally, it can also be nonverbal. It can also be um, self-mutilating acts. It can also be the things that they say, superficial cuts, saying that they're going to kill themselves. And in many attempts, there's a high level of hospitalization that goes on with people who have major depression. Because people who have major depression, in many instances, they don't necessarily act impulsive. They may think about this for months and months, and then they gradually develop the will to do so in a manner in which you least expect it. As opposed to other illnesses, they may act out more impulsive or they may act out in attention-seeking manners. A person who is major depressive, they may dwell on it for months and weeks and days before they decide to make an attempt. Hopefully, for those who are listening, if you experience anyone who has these issues or who has displayed these type of symptoms, we can avoid these things from happening. We can avoid fatality. We can avoid suicidal behavior. We can avoid fatal, life-threatening situations, or even physically threatening. Because we talk a lot about the fact that people who connect and who are successful, but what about those who develop long-term physical ailments by attempting this act? So I just want you to all keep in mind that. Now, I want to talk about the causes. And when I'm speaking of the causes of major depression, I want you all to keep in mind that there's not one way to receive it. It could be a combination of things. It can be how you were brought up. It could be things that have occurred long term that spawn the evolution of you developing this illness. It's a lack of someone seeking services, which to me, if the fact that people could actually get the treatment before this actually happened, it could be preventable. And in some ways, it cannot be. But this goes back to the fact that in the Black community, we refuse to be proactive in preventing things that could have been alleviated by our participation. And we wait till things become the worst of the worst until we decide, okay, now we need it. So in that, the presentation, and I'm talking about how it presents itself in a manner as it relates to stress, grieving of a loss, poor adjustment to personal problems or environment, meaning things that you encounter in your day-to-day life. Issues with brain chemistry, meaning that there are certain things. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist, okay? I'm not a psychiatrist, but at the same time, I do understand that there's certain things that it relates to lack of pleasurable fluids and things that go along within the brain, chemicals. that cause the onset of major depression. Also, in line with that, we're talking about hereditary situations, being that if there's a family member who has been diagnosed, particularly a parent, an aunt, uncle, grandmother, it increases the chances of another family member developing this disease. Major depression is a hereditary disease. Matter of fact, in many situations, particularly the 8 to 9% of Black people and other, and this goes along with other demographics also. In many of those situations, there's probably another family member that has a mental illness, or they have the same illness as MDD. When one person is diagnosed, it increases the chances of another person having the illness. I talked about self-inflicting behaviors, meaning problems you cause for yourself in a reaction to social stimuli. Your inability to problem solve or perceive things, acting in a manner that does not help you but hurt you. And then in that response, you typically blame yourself, and you go into as we talked about, the features of helplessness and worthlessness and negativity were currently happening. Most people with this illness become depressed based on an adverse consequence interacting with other people. A bad thing occurred. You were dating a person, they broke up. You tell the person, if you leave me, I'm going to kill myself. You lost your job. You feel like you're worthless. I just want to end it all. I'm worth nothing. I'm constantly being rejected. The most difficult thing about treating major depression is to help people understand their own value, thus increasing their ability to recognize the value in themselves and improving their self worth and self esteem. Poor problem solving skills, or decision making skills. Again, that goes back to the self inflicting thing. You're doing things that don't help you; they actually harm you. And there's a repetitiveness in constantly doing these things over and over. Okay, let's understand that. Also, we want to look at the fact that there are poor perception issues. Poor, poor actively use of perceptual evaluations of any issue that you encounter. You're seeing situations and you're perceiving them in a negative manner. You're looking for the worst. You cannot see the best in yourself nor in other people or in any situation that you're encountering. Everything is down. Poor adjustment to another mental health illness that is comorbid to MDD, meaning that people become depressed based on their inability to focus on to cope with other mental health issues, because major depression can run parallel with other mental health, such as anxiety, I listed depression, which is self-explanatory, and other self-related disorders. So what I'm stating, I meant to put mood. So there are people who have major depressive disorder that also have generalized anxiety disorder. They also have a personality disorder. They may be anti social personality disorder along with that. There are people who have ADHD and that are also major depressive. There are people who have conduct disorder that are also major depressive. There are people who have um, narcissistic personality disorder that are also major depressive. These things go hand in hand. And sometimes they become depressed because they're unable to deal with other mental health issues that they have developed. Also, one of the most critical things is that major depression can be a response to a major change in your life. Moving, not moving somewhere you don't want to move, or you don't find you miss where you're at, you become homesick. You're in a new job you don't necessarily like. You've been divorced, dealing with sexual trauma, physical trauma, an issue that occurred, something negative with someone that's close to you, a loved one or friend. If they're suffering from an illness, sickness, or something, some other disruption in their life, it influences you to also feel downward and depressed. So, major changes in one's life. Now, we'll talk about how it presents. We're going to focus on behavior, signs, and symptoms as explained by me. So, when we talk about how it's presented, and I'm going to say it in a manner that is representative out of the Black community. You may find someone, say your grandmother lost her husband, but your grandmother who lost her husband pretends she's happy. She goes to church. She constantly cooks. She tries to hold it together and put on a facade. And then she goes home alone and she's crying all the time, crying spells. And also having crying spells is also a a response to your mood that I didn't discuss. But crying spells is actually a behavior that stems from mood changes, having a low standard of mood. And so your grandmother is crying and nobody knows she's crying. When you come there, you see her crying. She's trying to, you know, put on a facade as if everything's okay. I just had a bad day. She's grieving. Another sign is that you go to somebody's house, particularly say another female, her hair is not done like it usually is done. She's not looking nice and neat. She don't want to go out to the happy hours on Fridays. You also notice that the upkeep of the house and the children are not where they used to be. A person who was once, an example of a person who was once highly talkative, all of a sudden doesn't call you anymore. Or when you do speak to them, they just say a few words and they don't want to go into detail about anything. As far as for Black men, they get fired from their job because they're not producing and productive as they once were. They come home upset and mad and don't say anything to anyone and go straight to the room. You may find a Black man drinking more than he usually drinks, or he's always drunk, or they may begin to use drugs. Also, a person that mood is down like this, they're constantly mad, upset. They can be mad and upset and downward, and they're negative about everything. And when you try to speak to them, they're unresponsive. In the Black community, due to the lack of social education on this. Many of us think all we have to do is pray for them and everything is going to be all right. We just got to pray for them. We just got to give it to, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in our community, we are blessed with well-trained, educated clinicians like myself who want to help our community. We need to start taking advantage of the talent that God blessed us with in our community. Major depression may present itself as if a person who was highly sexual, highly, interactive with their mate. Now you went from having sex 3 to 4 times a week. Now you're only having sex once or twice a month, if that. And even when you do have it, they're not necessarily enjoying the sex. That person may not pay attention to you like they used to. They may not uplift you and say things typically that they once did because they don't feel the need to do so. This is how major depression presents itself in the Black community. There's signs of neglect of, like I said, the household, the children, not being there for your children, not helping them with the homework, not going to school to see about them, not making sure that they have the normal things that they need for day-to-day life. You went from cooking 5 days a week to cooking 1 day a week. You're constantly sleeping all during the day. It's hard for you to go to sleep at night. You're tossing and turning. You're negative about everything. And it recurrently happens day after day after day. So that's what it looks like in our community. You don't want to listen to what anybody says. People tell you, hey, so-and-so, let's do this, let's do that. Or in many instances, when you are participating in self-defeating behaviors, and I'm going to get into this because this, to me, is exemplary of people on YouTube and other social media outlets who have MDD, and they use social media as a deterrent from treating their symptoms. They're feeling depressed, so now they create personas and they join groups and they join these other sayings and they get into these cliques as a way of getting away from their life and the life that produces the negativity, that produces the depression. And then they find themselves being in conflictual situations and being in what I would deem adversive interactions with others that they don't know, and they're highly sensitive to the verbiage of other people. I have seen this on and on again where there are people that have mental illness like this and similar. When the heat gets on them or when someone says things or there's an overall indictment of them, they may not be able to cope with that. They may transfer the same inability to cope in their real life, and it transfers to their inability to cope on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Just because the setting is different doesn't mean your response is going to change. You are who you are. Your mental illness presents the way it presents. Doesn't matter what environment you're in. And that's something that people need to understand. And this is one reason why I speak of those. If you have not been highly functional with your illness over a certain period of time and have been deemed highly functional, this is not the arena to be disclosing information if you cannot handle the backlash of insensitive ass people on YouTube. And excuse me for my language, that was my first time cursing. Didn't intend to curse, but it had to come out. Because there's a high level of insensitivity in the environment of social media. I encourage those who cannot handle that and know they cannot handle it, whether you're in treatment, particularly if you're not in treatment and refuse treatment. Your family tell you you need to get off of it and you refuse to listen. For those that tell you you should not be in environments that basically cause you to react in negative manners that is difficult for you to cope with. Why do you keep coming back? It's okay to take a break. It's okay to let it go. But for some, that's why you have people who have committed suicide. There are people who have had mental breakdowns because of their tumultuous interaction with others and constant beefs, because they're not mentally able to do it, and they understand that mental illness also hinders their ability to do so. And I'm speaking specifically in Black YouTube, and it even resonates throughout all aspects of social media platforms and etc. Okay. Now let's go to treatment. As it involves the treatment, I'm gonna first talk about medication. I think medication. There are some people who are able to be treated with MDD without medication. That's a small percentage. In my practice, I encourage those people, particularly if they're currently having moderate to severe episodes, that they need medication. Antidepressants, such as Cymbalta, Effexor, and Wellbutrin. I'm not a psychiatrist, but those are just a few that people are diagnosed. And of course, I provide the therapy and counseling, particularly CBT. Also, I've heard that dialectic behavioral therapy also is good, and also person-centered. I preferably use CBT, and I also use person-centered. And there's a lot of people that I know that use DBT, they use REBT therapy, other type of cognitive-like therapies, problem-solving or solution-focused related therapies. Also, group therapy. Major people who are diagnosed, they also do well when they're interacting with groups with people with other mental illness, particularly those that have depression just like them or have suffered similar issues such as them. Group therapy has also scientifically has been found to improve the ability of a person to not feel alone in their experience with mental illness and to grow in I would say a sisterhood or brotherhood or fraternizing with others does a lot with them socializing and verbalizing their experiences. I also want to talk about case management. Case management to me is very useful, particularly for those that can't function day to day. They can't live independently. They've been hospitalized a lot. They're living in group homes or other forms of assistive living programs. Case management is a paraprofessional service that operates in conjunction to professional services focusing on daily living skills and community supports. These are basically bachelor's level providers, someone with a bachelor's degree or who's not licensed that may have a master's degree, that provide day-to-day skills training and psychoeducation, medication management, and support that assist them in developing skills to function daily because of their mental illness. They need extra assistance to do things. Also, family support. Support of family, friends, and loved ones assist person with compliance. To me, family is highly critical in one's, particularly I found in my experience, families that give my clients the most support are the most successful. In my date program, it's for people who need a higher level of services. One of the biggest reasons why they need a higher level of services because the most of those individuals don't have strong family support. So, in my opinion, family support is critical in treatment because friends, family, loved ones can help you improve your compliance in seeking a psychiatrist or a counselor, social worker, or psychologist, or whomever, as it relates to your long term involvement in that treatment. And the fact that they inspire you and they encourage you to do so. And they also can interact in group and family therapy with you and also giving data that is important in our assessment of one's overall improvement. Prognosis, long-term effects. The long-term effect of major depression, of depressive disorder, is that it can hinder your overall ability to function long term. You may you may no longer be able to work a stressful job or a job that you once worked. You may work part time, or you may have to work in a less stressful industry. You may not be able to take care of your children. People lose their marriages, family. There may be situations in which there may be a higher tendency of suicide attempts. Treatment wise, again, medication treatment, therapy treatment, and so on. The most effective form of treatment is a combination of medication and therapy. You may need that to maintain your ability to function. It may be difficult to live a highly functional life without those services. Effectiveness of treatment. Cognitive behavioral therapy to me is one of the most effective ways of treating major depression. There's other therapies, but that's one of the most effective means, and the fact that it can be measured easier than in research than others. The treatment planning, interactive treatment planning, long term, and also compliance and consistency. And I talk about compliance here. Your ability to comply. That means attend your appointments, follow doctor's orders, do your homework in therapy and whatever therapeutic activities that you will need to improve. Following through on that improves and causes positive outcomes. The next one, potential of suicide and other self-mutilating behaviors. And I've spoken about this multiple times in this presentation. You are at a higher risk to harm yourself or to use superficial means of hurting yourself, which can cause you to inadvertently harm yourself permanently in an attempt to kill yourself. Those are the risks. Ability to maintain independence is going to be highly difficult. You're probably going to need some level of assistance from friends, family, or other social service agencies, particularly if you have moderate to mild recurrent depressive episodes. And it also increases if within major depression you have the existence of psychosis. Last, possible dependence of social service programs. I kind of spoken about that. That is highly likely based upon your overall functioning and the support that you receive. It's highly likely. Okay. So, guys, that concludes my presentation on major depression, or what we call major depressive disorder. If anybody has any questions, I'm going to give everybody the opportunity to ask questions for the next 15 to 20 minutes. And then after that, I will conclude my presentation. So if anybody has questions, this is the time now for the next 10, 15 minutes. You can ask whatever questions you like, and I can give you some analysis or some perspective on what you would like to know about major depressive disorder, even if it relates to um, someone that you know. So at this time, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask your questions at this point. While I'm waiting on questions, I'm gonna go ahead and give shout outs to Honeybee. What's up, Betty Ann, Jackie, Nova Real Show? What's up, brother? Mercy Thompson. What's up, Judith Perkins? What's up, None Swirl Zone? How you doing, brother? Be More Legends. What's up? I see, binary code up in here. Okay. What's up, We Unlock? Binary code say, okay, cool. I'm just learning right now. Good to see you. What's up, Commendable K? Man, for anybody around, man, if you want to learn about different aspects of social media, things in regards to Black YouTube, particularly the manosphere and so forth, Commendable K has great commentary on Black YouTube. I would encourage you all to check out his channel, Commendable K. Please subscribe to the brother. His channel is growing. His content is really good. Check him out. I do think everybody should be evaluated at least once a year for mental health. Commendable K. Everybody. What's up, Germ on the board? Bayou Bunny. What's up, girl? Evan Ames said, I'm going to Houston next month. Can I book a consultation? If anybody wants a consultation with me, hit me up on my email here, and you'll be more than happy to get the process going. Okay, let's see in here. I see some people troll a little bit. Yes, Nelly Child, I noticed that you mentioned that in regards to caseworkers interacting in therapy with the client. I'm taking a look at PRP, and I'm going to see if that's a Medicaid or is that a facility type service in the state of Texas. Hey, Queen Mercy, I see Chicano Azteca. How are you doing? I don't pronounce the word ask like ass, so I don't know what the hell you're talking about. So let me go ahead and time you out. Okay. Okay. So Queen Mercy stated, how can I find the criteria online? Well, basically, Queen Mercy, all you have to do is basically type in, as I'm going to state, type in DSM-5 criteria for major depression or major depressive disorder. And if you do that, they're going to give you the information. You're going to find a multitude of mental health organizations and institutions that will delineate the causes, the treatment, and so forth. Okay, so you can definitely look that up, and things will come up. Okay. What's up, Aya? She said you mentioned change of tone of voice. Could you elaborate? As it relates to tone of voice, because major depressive being characterized as the slowness of your cognitive and physical movements, that is also relative to your voice. People who are major depressive eyes have a tendency to talk in a very softer tone and a slower tone. And also people who are depressed they are not very the cadence in which they speak is slower, and it's a lot of hesitancy in the way they speak, as if they're not um, confident, and a lot of that is just due to the low of the low level mind state that they have based on the things that they're unable to cope with. So they'll talk in a very low and slow manner, a manner that it can be very vague, or also their response time. Like if you ask them a question, their response time may be slower than typically usual. It may take them 30 seconds to respond back, as opposed to effortlessly just responding um, in their time conversing with. Yes, they do lack. You're correct. It does seem like they lack emotions or feelings. It's that affect. See, we coin that as being a flat affect. So yes, they do lack emotion in their facial expressions, in their body movements, just in their overall verbal and nonverbal communication. Okay, they lack emotion because it takes more effort in a depressive state to show other emotion. Okay, I says this would be something that may be a fact in children that don't want to talk. A lot of times, and I'm gonna say this, eyes, and this may I don't want to go into other things. There are a lot of children who are falsely being diagnosed with autism because they don't want to talk to the people that are evaluating them or treating them. Um, it's very difficult to evaluate children. Some children may not want to talk because of trauma from something that they saw, or trauma from something that they experienced. It could be an array of variables that can influence why children refuse to talk. They could be grieving, they could be missing somebody, they're just not comfortable. I have seen and have noticed kids that have been misdiagnosed with things because of their inability to talk. But as I'm speaking of this, children, major depression, the way it presents in children is totally different than um, adults, because children may act out when depressed as opposed to adults. Children may act out in anger, children may act out in play, children may act out in school and so forth, and they may wet themselves, saw the bed. It's a lot of things with children that is not necessarily similar to adults as far as their reaction to events that contribute to depression. So as I spoke on this, I was coming from the perspective of adults, although I talked about children a little bit because there's over 15, 16% of our children that are depressed between the ages of, they kind of, this one agency that I spoke of, I think it was the National Organization of Mental Health, NH. They talked about like from 6 to 12, it's like 15%. From 6 to 7, they kind of broke it into age brackets. And in each situation, it was well over 13%, which is high, extremely high, particularly as it relates to other groups of people. So, are there any more questions? Are there any more questions that need to be asked? Anybody wants to ask? I really, really enjoy doing this because I'm in my element, to be honest with you. This is my natural element. Not to me, I'm more comfortable doing this as opposed to doing just regular commentary about various issues and beefing and roasting people and stuff. This is actually my element. This is something that I enjoy doing. Like it's work related, it's professional related, but it's natural. Nelly Child said, D. Durrell, I didn't catch the whole live. Did you discuss situational depression? Yes, I did. I focused on situational depression as it relates to loss of a job, loss of a loved one, divorce, moving to another city, health issues, or dealing the fact that a family member or someone that you are close to is experiencing these things. That can affect you. Now, I want you to understand that there's a difference between situationally depressed as it relates to clinically depressed. And defined in the DSM-5, the criteria is that you must experience at least one or more symptoms, whether it's mood, depressed mood, or lack of pleasure or lack of interest in activities that you typically would engage in. You have to have at least one of those along with 6 other symptoms. You have to have 5 out of the 8. Or should I say 4 other symptoms. But you have to have at least one of those symptoms or more. So situational depression is not clinical depression, because situational depression is what we may look at, say, you're adjusting. That may be what we call a adjustment disorder with depression, meaning that you're basically having issues adjusting to a major identifiable event. And this particular event has caused a change in your behavior. Now, the problem is that it can become more clinically major depressive if it lasts over 2 weeks and as an issue with your mood and doing pleasurable activities along with other symptoms. And it lasts for over 2 weeks to a point where it's hindering your ability to function. And again, your behavior has to fit the criteria. Typically, people who are depressed, they may have maybe one or more symptoms. They're just depressed. They're not clinically depressed, but they may have one or more of the features. They don't have 5 or more or 4 or more. Okay, they may have maybe 1 or 2. They may have 3. But again, to meet DSM criteria, you must have at least 5 of the 8. And of the 5, one has to be at least a depressed mood or lack of activity, lack of pleasure or pleasurable activities that you're partaking in. Because those symptoms are highly identifiable. It's the root of the other symptoms, because they all seem to stem from that. Yoko Yuklo stated, mental illness, including anorexia nervosa, is a subclinical symptom of vitamin B3 deficit disease known as pellagra. Unfortunately, I've only treated maybe 2 or 3 people with anorexia nervosa. I'm not that's not my expertise. So I don't really know a lot about that, and I do appreciate your knowledge on that, but it's not germane to the topic that we're talking about. But I appreciate you, Yoko, for giving us that information. Okay. Anybody else before I wrap it up? Okay. All right, guys. Well, no more questions. I hope that I have satisfied you all's education on major depressive disorder. I hope that the information that I provided can be something that can be viewed and shared to other people. For those that appreciate what I have given today, you can cash at me at Darrell77. You can send that. That is in support of the Janice House. You can donate to $Darrell77 for the information that I presented today. Okay, let's see. Nelly Child said, if a person is clinically depressed, isn't there something that can be tested in their blood to determine they are out balance? Yes, blood work can be done to detect mental illness, particularly those that have like psychosis and so forth. I assume the same thing can also be done with major depression because there are plenty of people, particularly on certain medications, they do every month or every 2 or 3 months receive blood work. Also, you can get an MRI done. Neurological testing also can be done because when you look at a brain, this is part of my training. When you see a witness a brain of or study the brain of a person that has normal brain functioning as opposed to someone that is MDD, you can see a decline in the activity. There's a noticeable decline in activity. Now, I want you all to understand that's a little bit outside of my expertise, so I can only speak very simple in regards to that. If you want more information, I would encourage you to seek a neuropsychologist or a psychiatrist in regards to those type of issues. That's not necessarily in the confines of professional counseling. Okay, so if that's not it, guys, again you can send cash apps to $Darrell77. Okay. Yoko Euclid said depression is a physical symptom of an acute vitamin B deficiency. No amount encouraged or self-assessed makes any difference. I totally disagree with that. Although I do think that depression is not a physical symptom. Depression is actually a mental health symptom that can attribute to other physical health symptoms that I did describe as it relates to issues of eating and sleeping, as it relates to the way you speak and move and so forth, and your lack of energy. Now, can a lack of vitamin B3 deficiency cause that? That may be a contributing factor, but there are people who don't have that deficiency that also um, that also have that. I mean, there are people who are depressed for a variety of reasons that I discussed. Okay. All right. Well, guys, with that being said, I appreciate your involvement in my presentation today. It was very refreshing for me to do this. This is one that I usually do on my Derail Life Solutions. It's on all three of my major platforms. So anyone that wants to see it, you can view it from those three channels. Again, guys, you can check out my therapy related content and business related content on Derail Life Solutions. You can check out Derail the Rebirth as I kind of do more entertaining topics and so on. And then you also can check me out on the Sectors TV that focuses on me operating in the Umar Johnson sector in conjunction with the church sectors. So with that being said, guys, y'all have a great day. Look forward to engaging with you all again. Have a great day. Peace.